Welcome to Shuffle Source. I'm your host Brandon, and today we are back with another Commander Precon upgrade video. This time we will be upgrading the World Shaper Precon from Edge of Eternities. Let's get into it. Really fast, before discussing the commander we will be using, let's quickly go over the Precon upgrade format that we use here at Shuffle Source. The first item to note is that we will either use the primary or the secondary commander. We have a cap of around $100 that we use when choosing the upgrades. We will be adding 10 cards and we will be removing 10 cards. Additionally, we do add a few what we call no budget options near the end of the video for people who either already have these cards or maybe have a little bit extra in their budget to do more upgrades. And lastly, we do use market value pricing provided by TCG Player at the time of recording, which is displayed at the bottom of the screen while we're discussing the cards. So the commander we will be discussing today is Hearthhull the Worldseed. For 1, a black, a red, and a green, you have a legendary artifact spacecraft that has station. Tap another creature you control, put charge counters equal to its power on this spacecraft. Station only as a sorcery. It is an artifact creature at 8+. At 2 charge counters, you can pay 1, tap this, sacrifice a land, draw 2 cards, you may play an additional land this turn. And at 8 charge counters, it becomes a 6/7 flying vigilant haste creature that has the ability, whenever you sacrifice a land, each opponent loses 2 life. So this is a new spacecraft commander that was introduced in Edge of Eternities. All spacecrafts originally come in as artifacts, but after you station them up to a certain threshold, they become a creature. As you can see, Hearthhull unlocks 2 separate abilities as it continues to get charge counters, both of which are very strong and really highlight the core strategies of this deck. When fully online, this commander can sacrifice a land that will then damage your opponents. You then get to draw 2 cards and play another land. Not to mention, a 6/7 flying creature is nothing to scoff at. Having flying gives it evasion to connect on your opponents, but having vigilance also means we can attack and then tap it to still use its sacrifice ability. So the way we want to upgrade this deck is by reinforcing what this deck is already trying to do. We want to add more ramp and land recursion pieces. We also want to add some landfall payoffs because we will be putting a lot of lands on the board. And finally, we want to add some additional land sacrifice outlets so that we can have some explosive turns with our commander's life loss ability. Here we have the first of our additions. We have Ancient Green Warden. For 4 and 2 green, it is a 5/7 creature elemental that has reach. You may play lands from your graveyard. If a land entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So let's start off by talking about that stat line. 5/7 reach is pretty good. That's going to allow us to block a lot of creatures, including flying, and it also allows us to be able to station Hearthhull if we really need the help. However, really why it's in here is it's another land recursion piece. So this is going to allow us to replay sacrificed lands from our graveyard, which is essential for sustaining Hearthhull's draw and drain engine. Also, double landfall triggers are great. This is going to allow us to amplify a lot of the landfall synergy cards that we have in this deck and that we will be adding. So here we have our next addition, Assassin's Trophy. For 1 black and 1 green, we have an instant that says destroy target permanent an opponent controls. Its controller may search the library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So we're adding this card because I wanted to add a bit more of flexible removal to this deck. This will allow us to instantly answer really any type of problematic permanent that we run into, whether that's a creature, an artifact, enchantment, planeswalkers, lands, you get the idea. Having great targeted removal is essential in building or upgrading any sort of commander deck. Assassin's Trophy just really is a better upgrade for one of the cards that we will be removing in place of it. And here we have our next addition, Azusa Lost But Seeking. For 2 colorless and 1 green, we have a 1/2 legendary creature human monk that says you may play 2 additional lands on each of your turns. Azusa is honestly one of the first cards I thought about when upgrading this deck. She's awesome for ramping our deck. She's cheap and an effective way to turbocharge the amount of lands we can get on the board. Getting more lands on the board means we have more lands to sacrifice to Hearthhull's draw and damage abilities, and for a lot of the other land sacrifice outlets that we're going to be using, she's going to pair well with a lot of cards that are going to allow us to play lands from our graveyard. Additionally, being able to play multiple lands per turn, including out of our graveyard, means that anything that triggers off landfall is going to trigger 2 additional times. And next up, we have Greater Gargadon. For 9 colorless and 1 red, we have a 9/7 creature beast that has Suspend 10 for 1 red. And it has the ability sacrifice an artifact, creature, or land. Remove a time counter from Greater Gargadon. activate only if Greater Gargadon is suspended. So Greater Gargadon really helps us in a variety of ways. First of all, that's a pretty serious sacrifice outlet while it is suspended. And the reason we want to do that is because when Hearthhull has the 8+ charge counters on it, we're going to do 2 damage to each of our opponents for every land we sacrifice. Greater Gargadon allows us to sacrifice a lot of lands at any time to do a massive amount of damage to our opponents. We also do have other cards that are going to allow us to bring back a lot of those lands we sacrificed, so don't worry about putting a lot of lands into this ability. Also later in the game, this can be a nice sneaky blocker for you because your opponent could swing in and you could just sacrifice a bunch of land to get rid of the final suspend counter and now have this big 9/7 blocker to protect you. Also later on, being able to swing in with a 9/7 creature on the board is something your opponents are going to have to deal with in some way. And here we have Ice Tilt Explorer for 2 colorless and 2 green. We have a 2/4 creature insect scout that has, you may play an additional land on each of your turns. You may play lands from your graveyard and landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, mill a card. So if I could have designed a card that would be perfect for this deck, it's Ice Tilt Explorer. First of all, we're going to get extra land drops on our turn, which is important. We want lands for this deck. We have landfall synergies, and it also turns into ammunition that we can sacrifice with our commander to deal life loss to our opponents. Next, we also get to play lands from our graveyard, which is huge because that allows us to keep the sacrifice and recursion engine going. Honestly, you could have just stopped there with this card and everyone would still play it, but we also get a third ability. Whenever we play a land, we get to mill the card. This can help us fill out our graveyard with even more lands to be able to play later. Amazing card, easily one of the best that was added in Edge of Eternities. And next up we have Lotus Cobra for 1 and 1 green. We have a 2/1 creature snake that has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, add 1 mana of any color. So really you end up getting so much additional mana by having this creature out on the board, especially if you can get it out by turn 2, because of the amount of lands we're going to be playing with this deck. We also have a lot of other cards like Azusa, for example, that are going to allow us to play multiple lands per turn, which means every time we add a land, we get to add a mana of any color. Being able to add a mana of any color is also really great because that allows us to do some fixing considering this is a 3-color Jund deck. Whether you're playing lands from your hand or from your graveyard, this card's just going to allow you to potentially have some big turns considering the additional mana you'll get from it. You also love to see this early because it will come down a turn or 2 before your commander will, and you can use this to easily station Hearthhull to unlock its first ability. And here we have our next addition. We have Lumra, Bellow of the Woods for 4 colorless and 2 green. We have a Star legendary creature, Elemental Bear. It has Vigilance, Reach. Lumra, Bellow of the Woods, power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. When Lumra enters, mill 4 cards, then return all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So the first call out here is having power and toughness equal to your land count makes Lumra a huge threat and also can be really awesome at charging Hearthhull up all the way really whenever we need to. It also having Vigilance and Reach allows us to both stay aggressive and defensive. And as I stated before, we can make a very big attack, and because it's vigilant, it won't tap, and then we could tap it potentially to charge up Hearthhull if we really needed to. However, the real star of the show here is going to be that return all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped ability. This is going to be awesome if you need an explosive amount of landfall triggers, or if you need to quickly fill up your lands again to be able to then use another sacrifice outlet to drain your opponents of life with Hearthhull. Lumra is just another great piece for our overall strategy. And here's our next addition, Mightform Harmonizer for 2 colors and 2 green. We have a 4/4 creature insect druid that has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, double the power of target creature you control until end of turn. It also has Warp for 2 colorless and 1 green. You may cast this card from your hand for its warp cost, exile this creature at the beginning of the next end step, then you may cast it from exile on a later turn. So this is another new card from Edge of Eternities, and I definitely wanted to try to feature some cards from the new set that will actually pair up really well with the deck. So the major call out here has definitely got to be that landfall ability. Being able to double the power of a creature each time you play a land can really be massive. Because of the amount of lands that you're actually able to get on the battlefield with this deck on a single turn, you can use it to get a creature big enough to charge Hearthhull back up to max power, or in a lot of cases you can use it to just make a creature such a big threat that you can swing in and really damage your opponents. A lot of times we want to use this on Hearthhull itself because Hearthhull is flying. So if we can drop a couple of lands on the same turn, we can really have Hearthhull swing in and in some cases just kill our opponents with commander damage. Its warp ability also gives us a little bit of flexibility in timing on when we really want this powerful landfall ability on the board. This card can really help you close out games. And here's our next addition, Sylvan Safekeeper. For 1 green, we have a 1/1 creature human wizard that has an ability, sacrifice a land, target creature you control gains Shroud until end of turn. It can't be the target of spells or abilities. So at just a single green mana, this card is really easy to slot in and just start building value and protection right away. So this is another one of those cards that we're adding that is going to just give us a static sacrifice ability to be able to let us sacrifice a bunch of lands at any time that we want. Ideally, we want to be able to use this repeatable sacrifice outlet to trigger Hearthhull's life loss ability. Also, whenever you sacrifice that land, you're also going to be able to put Shroud on a creature. So this is really helpful for being able to protect a lot of the combo pieces and our commander itself whenever it becomes a creature. So this card really synergizes well with any of the number of cards that we already have in the deck or are adding that will allow us to play lands from our graveyard because we can keep that land loop going. So as you can see, for just a single mana, you can get some insane value out of this card. And here we have the last of our additions. We have Zurin Orb. For 0 mana. We have an artifact that says sacrifice a land, you gain 2 life. I mean, again, this is just another one of those free land sacrifice outlets. This is awesome. This will allow us to be able to sacrifice any amount of lands that we want and usually use that paired up whenever our commander is fully online to deal that damage to our opponents. Not to mention that gaining of 2 life is a great way to stabilize our life if we get really low. Not to mention we can also sacrifice some lands in a last ditch effort in case our opponents try to swing in for lethal. In response, we can just sacrifice a few lands to keep our life total above 0. This card just has the ability to let us stick around in this game much longer. We've now made it to the removals portion of this video, and we're going to kick things off with Centaur Vinecrasher. For 3 colorless and 1 green, we have a 1/1 creature plant centaur that has trample. This creature enters with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the number of land cards in all graveyards. And it also says whenever a land card is put into a graveyard from anywhere, you may pay 2 green. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. The first is that 4 mana seems like a bit of an investment for a 1/1 that conditionally gets bigger depending on the amount of lands we have in our graveyard. Now I understand we do have the ability to kind of game that a little bit where we can use some of our land sacrifice outlets to really pour a lot of lands into our graveyard and then cast the spell. So I get what we're trying to do. But again, that is also situational on the game. You have to have your sacrifice outlet and the ways to get those cards back. Otherwise, you're going to just be throwing all your lands in the graveyard. Also, while it does have some interesting abilities on it, none of them really directly support our strategy in the sense of it's not providing us extra land drops. It's not providing us a sacrifice outlet for lands, and it's not really giving us much of a landfall trigger that really helps with the rest of our board. And here we have our next cut, Formless Genesis. For 2 and a green, we have a Kindred Sorcery Shapeshifter that has Changeling. This card is every creature type. Create an XX colorless Shapeshifter creature token with Changeling and Death Touch, where X is the number of land cards in your graveyard. It also has Retrace. You may cast this card from your graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying its other costs. So similar to the previous card we discussed, it sort of has indirect land synergy in that it's going to rely on the number of lands in our graveyard at a given point of time, and it doesn't really help us sacrifice a large number of them, other than the fact that we can get an additional land into the graveyard using its Retrace ability. And because of the variability of the lands, it just becomes a little bit too situational. Here we have our next cut, Groundskeeper. For 1 green, we have a 1/1 creature human druid that has an ability where you can pay 1 and a green, return target basic land cards from your graveyard to your hand. So while this card does give us a little bit of land recursion, keep in mind we're paying mana to do it, and we're returning the lands to our hand, not directly to the battlefield. We also have some other cards that we put in with our additions, like Icetill Explorer, for example, that's just going to allow us to play the lands directly out of our graveyard. This card just really gets outclassed by a lot of the other cards that we're adding. And here we have our next cut. We have Hammer of Perforos. For 1 and 2 red. We have a legendary enchantment artifact that says creatures you control have haste. You can also pay 2, pay red, tap this, sacrifice a land, create a 3/3 colorless golem enchantment artifact creature token. While granting haste is good, haste is really not the biggest deal for this particular deck. Also, while this is technically a land sacrifice outlet, it is quite an expensive one, meaning we have to spend 3 mana each time that we want to do it. Honestly, we're just adding cheaper and better sacrifice outlets. And here's our next removal, Loamcrafter Fawn. For 2 colorless and a green, we have a 3/3 creature Satyr Druid that says whenever this creature enters, you may discard 1 or more land cards. When you do, return up to that many target non-land permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. So I understand this is here to try to recur you back some non-land permanents that may be in your graveyard for the trade of discarding lands into your graveyard. However, discarding lands is not exactly what we're trying to do. I understand that we do have some cards that are really big on the amount of lands in your graveyard. However, we're removing actually a few of those, and we would rather be playing these lands, sacrificing them, and then getting them back. This ability also only happens the turn that it enters, so you're just getting a one-time effect out of it. Honestly, I think a lot of the other additions we're adding just provides a lot more repeatable value than this card will. And here's our next removal, Scouring Swarm. For 1, a black and a green, we have a 1/1 creature insect that has flying. Whenever you sacrifice a land, create a tapped token that's a copy of this creature if 7 or more land cards are in your graveyard. Otherwise, create a tapped 1/1 black insect creature token with flying. So I must admit, I was a little bit torn when deciding to remove this card because I do think it's a really neat creative space. It's sort of a new fun play on Scoot Swarm. So I kind of like the card. But the truth is I just don't think it's going to provide the value that we need to really upgrade this deck further. So I think at first glance, you may think this card is actually really good. However, I do believe that when you actually do play this card, or if you really break down this ability a little bit further, you'll realize that maybe it's not as good as you think. Having the requirement of 7 lands in your graveyard for that full effect of creating additional Scouring Swarms is a lot of lands to have in your graveyard. Now, I understand if there's any deck that can do it, it's this one. But even then, the idea is you want to be putting them in the graveyard and then bringing them back. You're not really necessarily trying to have a huge stockpile of lands in your graveyard if you can help it. I also don't really like that the tokens that you're creating have to come in tapped for some reason. I feel like it still wouldn't have been that bad even if they came in untapped. This card's also not helping us sacrifice lands or anything, it's just reliant on whenever we sacrifice lands from other sources. Next on the chopping block, we have Tear Asunder. For 1 colorless and 1 green, we have an instant that has Kicker. For 1 and 1 black, you may pay an additional 1 and 1 black as you cast the spell. Exile target artifact or enchantment. If this spell was kicked, exile target non-land permanent instead. So I do think it's nice that this card does exile instead of destroy, but the truth is you have to invest 4 mana into this if you want to be able to choose something other than an artifact or an enchantment. I just think that 4 mana for a piece of targeted removal is just too expensive with a lot of the other great cards that are out there today. And here we have our next removal, Urg, Spawn of Turg. For 2 black and 1 green, we have a star 5 legendary creature Frog Beast. Urg's power is equal to the number of land cards in your graveyard. At the beginning of your upkeep, surveil 1. Look at the top card of your library, you may put that card into your graveyard. You can also pay 1 black and 1 green, sacrifice a land, you gain 2 life. So this is kind of a fun card, but the truth is it's just not that great of a card for this particular deck. First of all, it uses 3 solid color pips, so you need to be able to have the right combination of colors by that time to be able to play the card. Next, again, it's dependent on the amount of lands you have in your graveyard, and like I said with many of the other cards before, while we do have the ability to put cards in our graveyard, we're not trying to stockpile a ton of lands in our graveyard. We want to be able to sacrifice them to put them in the graveyard and then play them out of the graveyard whenever we can. And while this does have a sacrifice outlet on it, we're putting in Zurin Orb, which doesn't cost any mana, and the ability to sacrifice lands also doesn't cost any mana, and we still gain the 2 life. So our next removal is Wastes. Yep, just the basic land Wastes. So spoiler, the reason Wastes is in this deck at all is because of the next card after this that we will be cutting. This deck actually does have a lot of lands in it, and it should, but honestly, just dropping Wastes really won't mess up your strategy much at all. And you are a 3-color deck, so having a colorless land is not always the best, especially if you're cutting the reason that it's in here at all, which we are. And here we have the last of our removals. We have Worldbreaker. For 6 colors and 1 green, we have a 5/7 creature Eldrazi that has Devoid. This card has no color. When you cast this spell, exile target artifact, enchantment, or land. It also has reach, and you can pay 2 and pay a colorless. Sacrifice a land, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. So I understand that this card does have a little bit of removal. It also has a decent body with reach. And also it does have a way to be able to sacrifice lands. However, again, this is an expensive way to sacrifice lands. We're adding cards that do it better and cheaper. And to be honest, Lumra is also a really good reach creature that actually costs 1 mana less to get on the battlefield. So we've now made it to the no budget options part of this video, and we're going to kick things off with Burgeoning. For 1 green, we have an enchantment that reads, whenever an opponent plays a land, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So as we have discussed in much detail, this deck runs a lot of lands. So having multiple lands in your hand, especially at the starting turns of the game, is actually very common. This card is going to allow us to ramp on our opponent's turn. If you start the game with this on the battlefield, by the time it makes it all the way back around to you, you could have 4 mana at the start of your turn 2, assuming that you went first. This card just has the ability to set up such an explosive start of the game, and it can seriously put you in a commanding lead. Also, even later in the game, as you continue to draw more lands into your hand, as your opponents continue to play more land drops, you're just going to get to be able to play those lands. Very good card, and you will definitely be happy to see it when you do get it. Here we have the next of our no budget options. We have Scapeshift. For 2 colors and 2 green, we have a sorcery that says sacrifice any number of lands. Search your library for up to that many land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. This card just goes insane in this deck, and in a lot of cases can be a game finisher for you. First of all, it gives us a mass land sacrifice outlet so that we can ideally trigger Hearthhull's life loss ability to be able to drain our opponent's life total in a single turn. Not to mention, think about all of the landfall triggers that you can get from the landfall synergies that we have in this deck. Let's say you have Mightform Harmonizer on the battlefield, for example. That is a lot of power doubling that's going to happen. That's going to be some insane power boost to your creatures. And here we have our final no budget option. We have Squandered Resources. For 1 black and 1 green, we have an enchantment that says sacrifice a land. Add to your mana pool 1 mana of any type that sacrificed land could produce. Play this ability as a mana source. So while that kind of reads a little strange, what it's really telling you is that this turns every land you sacrifice into mana ramp. This is again another great sacrifice outlet to use with our commander, and the fact that if we do sacrifice lands with this card, we're going to be able to get mana out of it. In fact, what you can do is you could tap your land for mana, put that mana into your mana pool, then sacrifice that land to then get an additional mana added to your mana pool to get double value out of it. So as you can imagine, if you were to do this with 5 lands, you could potentially get 10 mana from that. That can really help you play a lot of the cards out of your hand that you might have. And again, you don't have to worry too much about sacrificing a lot of these lands, because you do have a lot of pieces in this deck that will allow you to play lands from your graveyard. Awesome card, definitely a powerhouse in this deck. And there you have it. After upgrading this deck, we have a final upgrade cost of $65.01. This total does not include the no budget options that we covered. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe for more videos. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the Worldshaper Precon. Which other cards do you think I should add to the deck? If you want to see what the Worldshaper Precon deck can do on the table, check out the video link here and watch me and 3 of my friends in an epic space-themed battle using the Edge of Eternities Precon decks. Until next time, thank you for watching.